Operating in occupied China during World War II, Unit 731 was a covert biological and chemical warfare research unit of the Imperial Japanese Army. Led by General Shiro Ishii, they performed unspeakable experiments on thousands of Chinese, Korean, and Allied prisoners of war. Victims, referred to as logs, were subjected to vivisection dissection while alive without anesthesia to study organ functions. They were infected with plague, anthrax, and cholera to test biological weapons, and frozen alive to study frostbite treatments. It is estimated that over 3,000 people died in the facility, and tens of thousands more died from the field testing of their biological weapons. For 40 years, the U.S. Public Health Service conducted a study on 600 African American men in Alabama. The researchers wanted to observe the natural progression of untreated syphilis. The men were told they were being treated for bad blood and were given free meals and burial insurance as incentives. The horrifying part is that even after penicillin became the standard cure for syphilis in 1947, the researchers intentionally withheld the treatment from the men so the study could continue. Dozens died, and many wives and children were infected before the study was exposed by the press in 1972. At the Dachau concentration camp, Nazi doctors conducted brutal experiments to simulate conditions on the Eastern Front. They wanted to know how long German pilots could survive in freezing water if they were shot down. Prisoners were forced into tanks of ice water for up to 3 hours, or stripped naked and strapped to stretchers outdoors in freezing winter temperatures. Doctors measured changes in heart rate and body temperature until the victims died. The rewarming experiments were equally brutal, involving boiling water or heat lamps that burned the skin. This was a top-secret CIA program dedicated to developing mind control techniques to be used against Soviet spies. The agency experimented on unsuspecting U.S. and Canadian citizens, including students, prisoners, and mental patients. The experiments involved administering massive doses of LSD and other drugs without the subject's knowledge, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, and verbal and sexual abuse. The goal was to break the human mind to create a Manchurian Candidate-style agent. Many victims suffered permanent psychological damage. Psychologist Philip Zimbardo wanted to study the psychological effects of perceived power. He recruited college students and randomly assigned them roles as guards or prisoners in a mock prison built in the basement of Stanford University. The experiment was supposed to last 2 weeks, but had to be stopped after only 6 days. The guards quickly became sadistic, subjecting the prisoners to psychological torture, humiliation, and sleep deprivation. The prisoners suffered severe emotional breakdowns. It proved how easily ordinary people can turn evil under the right situational pressures. Wendell Johnson, a speech pathologist, wanted to prove his theory that stuttering was a learned behavior caused by parents criticizing their children's speech. He used 22 orphan children as subjects. Half the children were praised for their speech. The other half, many of whom did not stutter initially, were mercilessly criticized, belittled, and told they were developing severe stutters. The experiment failed to induce stuttering, but the negative reinforcement caused lasting psychological trauma, turning previously normal-speaking children into withdrawn, anxious individuals who were terrified to speak. During the apartheid era, the South African Defense Force considered homosexuality a mental illness that could be cured. Conscripts suspected of being gay were sent to a military psychiatric ward called Ward 22. There, they were subjected to brutal aversion therapy, including intense electric shocks administered while they were shown homoerotic images. If that failed, many were subjected to chemical castration or even forced sex change operations. It is estimated that up to 900 forced sex changes took place during this period. Before the Tuskegee Study ended, U.S. researchers conducted an even more direct experiment in Guatemala. Instead of just observing the disease, doctors intentionally infected over 1,300 prisoners, soldiers, and mental patients with syphilis and gonorrhea. They used infected prostitutes to transmit the disease or directly inoculated victims through spinal punctures and injections. The goal was to test the effectiveness of penicillin as a preventative after exposure. The study was kept secret for decades until it was discovered by a historian in 2010. At the Vipeholm Mental Hospital in Sweden, researchers wanted to study the connection between sugar and tooth decay. They used the intellectually disabled patients as test subjects. For years, patients were fed massive amounts of sugary substances, including a specially developed sticky toffee that would cling to their teeth. The result was catastrophic tooth decay and pain for the patients, many of whom could not communicate their suffering. The study did prove the link between sugar and cavities, but at a terrible human cost. After the Holocaust, psychologist Stanley Milgram wanted to understand how ordinary people could commit atrocities if ordered to do so. In his lab, a teacher, the subject was told to administer increasingly severe electric shocks to a learner and actor every time they answered a question wrong. Despite the actor screaming in fake pain and begging to stop, 65% of participants continued to administer shocks up to the maximum for 150-volt 30 levels simply because a man in a lab coat told them, "The experiment requires that you continue." To test how vulnerable an American city would be to a biological attack, the U.S. Navy secretly sprayed a bacterium called Serratia marcescens over the San Francisco Bay Area for 6 days. The military believed the bacteria were harmless, but the massive cloud of microbes caused a rare urinary tract infection outbreak that hospitalized 11 people and killed one man, Edward Nevin. The experiment changed the microbial ecology of the area forever, and the residents were never informed they had been used as test subjects. At a school for intellectually disabled children in Massachusetts, researchers from MIT and Harvard wanted to study how the body absorbs minerals. They recruited unwitting children into a science club. The children were fed breakfast cereal spiked with radioactive isotopes of iron and calcium. Neither the children nor their parents were told that they were consuming radioactive materials. The study was funded by the Quaker Oats Company and the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission. If you liked the video, subscribe to the channel and give it a like. See you in the next video.